I'll get it right by the end of the semester. As before, make sure you copy your preferences before opening up Maya. If you haven't done that, always do that first. I'm going to do it again. I'm going to delete my old preferences and copy my preferences back in here. All right, so now what we're going to do is get into our scene, and we're going to set up our project. So I'm going to go to File, Set Project. First thing we do when we come into the software, we click on our scene folder, not the actual scenes folder, but this folder. We hit Set, and then we go to Open our most recent file. It's thinking. All right, so once it's open, it's still thinking now. What should be the first thing that we do? Save as, right? We should save it as something else. And we can even get descriptive in how we're saving this, because right now if we look at our names, 1, 2, 3, doesn't mean a whole lot to us 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now, a year from now. However, if I say scene 04, and I put somewhere in here rendering setup, now that might make a little bit more sense to me that I know what stage of the part I'm at, okay? Some students will have 300 files. Where is this 300 files? Where is the one that I need? I don't know where it is. Obviously the most recent one, but if you had to go back before you did lighting, now you know where it is. Or before you did another object, you know where it is. All right, so I opened it up. I saved it as Sarcona Miniroom Rendering Setup _04. So what we want to do now is we want to set up our camera. A camera is just like a real world camera. We have to know what kind of footage we're going to be shooting. You've seen, I'm sure since you were little kids, you've seen widescreen movies. But before widescreen, there was like these squarer ones, like regular tube TVs. If you look at your right screen that you have, the Dell screen, that screen is more in line with a 4:3 ratio, meaning that it's a bit narrower than it is taller. If you look at the HP, that's more of like a widescreen monitor. So a long time ago, this was the only TV we had, is stuff that looked like this. And so pretty much all the stuff was one format. Now with the widescreen, we have a choice that we have to make sure that we choose, because if we choose the wrong thing, we may get black bars on the top and bottom of our footage, or horribly on the right and left of our footage. So we're going to go to the render settings. So way at the top of this, remember we had the gears where we were, or the clappers where we were clicking on the render button? On the far right-ish, there's one that has a little gear on it, and that's our render settings. So we're going to click on the little clapper with the render settings button, and that opens up our render settings. And there's a bunch of tabs in here, and just like everything else, we're going to focus on our specific ones. All right, so we need to worry about our resolution. Right now, our camera is showing us one thing, but what's going to render out is going to be something a bit different. Imagine if my screen was this big. Okay, and I hit the render button, it's not going to look this tall and this narrow. It's going to render out something completely different. So what I want to do is set something up so I know exactly what's going to be coming out. When I hit the render button, I want to know exactly what my framing is. Okay, so this little blue circle right here under the word show is the resolution gate. So I'm going to click that resolution gate. Okay, and you should see on the top of your resolution gate it says 960 by 540. That resolution is basically half of what you would buy in a TV now. So a TV, not the super expensive ones, but like a good priced one, like a 1920 by 1080 TV. This is half of that resolution. Okay. Now the reason they go half is just because you still get the same proportions. You still get widescreen. This will still look good on a regular TV. It'll render pretty quick because it's not 1920 by 1080. The bigger you go here with this number, the longer it's going to take to render. Okay, so like in our advanced class, we render stuff out that would be for like a magazine cover. So we render it out at 2400 pixels by 3000 pixels, just so we have enough resolution to hold on to all the detail that's inside that scene. And those renderings sometimes take 2 or 3 or 4 hours for that one frame to come out. Okay, So inside the render settings, we're going to look at a couple things. One of them is image format. So right now it's set to OpenEXR. OpenEXR is a kind of format developed by ILM, Industrial Light and Magic. And what it does is it saves a whole bunch of information inside this one file. So you know how like a regular, like a TIFF or a PNG or other file formats, PSDs, they save like layer information and alpha channels and clipping masks and whatever else that you may use. An EXR can save, I think it's like 128 different sub-elements inside of it. So I could actually save like, what do the shadows look like? Save that to this file. What does this look like? Save that to the file. And then allow me to adjust all those parameters afterwards. All right. For this class, we're not going to do too much of that, but we will use this file extension because it's the best one. The image compression we're going to leave as a zips. We do need to name this. So you see here where it says file name prefix, it says not set using scene name. So what that means is whatever my scene is called, Sarcona Miniroom Rendering Setup, that's what's going to render out. So I want to rename this. So I'm going to call it Sarcona _ Miniroom. As newbies to the 3D world, you need to make sure your name is on everything. If your name is on everything, it makes it 10 times easier to find. If you just called it scene, guess how many files on this computer may have the name scene in it? A whole lot. Okay, so we've named it Sarcona _ Miniroom, or whatever your name is. Right now it's set to render out a single frame. Okay, so when we hit the render button, it renders a single frame, but that's just like a preview. That's not actually rendering stuff out. What we want to do is go here and choose the third option from the top, name.number.extension. Okay, the third option from the top will render out what's called a sequence, meaning it's going to go to frame 1 and render, then go to frame 2 and render, then go to frame 3 and render. So by the end of this, we'll have about 120 different frames, 120 different files. So the way it's going to label it is it's going to label it the name, which is Sarcona Miniroom, dot, whatever frame we're at, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever, and then the extension, which is OpenEXR. So we can see a little preview of it right here. Now this is very important to make sure our stuff is named correctly, because if it's not, then After Effects will not read it. All right, so we have our OpenEXR, we have our name.number.extension, frame padding, just so you can see what this is. It'll change how many digits are inside this number. So with 0, it'll be like .1. With 4 or 5, it'll be 0001. Okay, again, that's important because some software, even your operating system, may read 01, or it may read 1, and then the next one in the logical sequence would be 10. And then the next one will be 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and then it'll go to 2, and then it'll go to 20 and do all the 20s, and then go to 3 and then do all the 30s. So having this padding on there prevents that from happening. Okay, so it's always good to just leave that. I just like to show it, this padding.
No, what programs do that?
So After Effects doesn't do it, but there are some other programs that will, where they read it. And so it's good just to leave it on there, just in case. I know that sometimes, and it might just be not remembering it correctly, sometimes Windows has actually brought up my stuff in alphabetical order, and it's done 1, 10, whatever.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, I don't like it when it does that. So here's our start frame, here's our end frame. Because we're doing an animation, we have to tell it, where am I starting my rendering, where am I ending my rendering? So we're going to render out 120 frames. We haven't set that stuff up yet. So I'm just going to type in end frame 120. Okay, and this is just like, I'm starting this at frame 1, and I'm going to render it out to a frame 120, and then that'll be my sequence. That'll be how many frames out I'm going to get. And then further down, I'm going to choose which camera I'm going to render with. Okay, we're going to reset this in a second. Now yours up here under the file name, let's say you had more than one camera that you're rendering, because you can render through more than one camera. What it'll do is it'll sometimes put the other name of your camera right up at the top. So it would say perspective / da 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 da. So we'll choose this in a second because we want to create a different camera when we do our actual rendering. So we'll just leave that as it is now. I'm going to scroll down here, and here's the image size. So if I had a desire to render this out at a higher quality, I could do so right here. I could tell it that I want to render this at HD 720, HD 1080. I can scroll down and do an 8x10 image or whatever. For what we're going to do in this class, for now, most things are going to be 960 by 540. We may render out some stills at a higher resolution. But we just don't have the rendering power to render out an animation at a crazy high res. We have on the wall there are these render signs right here. And if you do render, you put this on your computer. That way when someone comes in next class, if they're nice, they won't shut your computer down for you. Okay? Because if your computer stops rendering or shuts down, it stops rendering. Okay? So we try to be as efficient as possible with this. Resolution doesn't matter. I can put this up to 10,000 or I can put it down to 2. We're keeping it digitally. Dots per inch only counts for people who are going to print stuff. We're not printing anything right now. None of this matters. Okay, under quality. Remember we had the really grainy shadows? Okay, everyone was complaining about grainy shadows. This is where we can crank up this setting. That'll get rid of those grainy shadows. And the nice thing is that we only have one slider. We just pull this one slider all the way up to 2. That's it. Okay. For most of your scenes, taking this from 0.25 up to 2 is going to cover you. If you have something more advanced, you have some crazy lighting in your scene, you have something where you're still getting grain, then you can come back and up this lighting quality. When we play with these settings, now our render time is going to be increased by a whole lot. Just so you can see how slow it's going to go, I'm going to pull this down to 0.10. Okay, so I'm rendering this exactly the same frame, exactly the same distance from the camera. You can see how slow this is already going. This took 12 seconds, right? So let me crank this up to 2. I'm going to hit the Save Image button and then hit the Render button. And now watch how slow this is going to go. We can only hope.
Wow.
Okay, so this is obviously going to go a lot slower because we have the quality turned up. Most of that grain is going to go away. We are not going to eliminate the grain fully. There's still some grain inside my scene because my materials are not all Mila's right now. Also, there's always going to be like a presence of some grain unless you start really cranking up these settings, which we really don't want to do because then it's going to go even slower. All right?
So when you're working, would you just do it in 0.25?
Definitely, yes. As we're working, as we're playing around, as we're testing stuff, because you may not be ready to render yet. You may still want to add some stuff to your scene. You may want to add some textures or whatever. Put it back to 0.25 or even lower. Okay, 0.1. You saw how quick that was, right? You can leave it at 0.1 the entire time. Then right before you hit that button to go do the thing, crank it up to 2. And that's usually what I'll do, is crank it up to 2 and then render it. And then what I do throughout is I'm always checking my rendering. So when I say go ahead and render, I go into the area where it's saving my renders and I watch them. I look at the first frame and I make sure it's still good. If it's not, I cancel it right there, fix what I need to, and then render it again. Some people just hope, just like I'm going to set it to render and then hope that everything works out, and you can't do that. So now, it's always like the weird spots that it's like stuck on, like it's black, just there you go. So 1:43 for the one frame, and I'm not actually even like zoomed in. I'm actually pretty far away, so most of the scene is not even really shown. Some things that will add to our render time is lights. The more lights we have in our scene, the more shadows we're going to have in our scene, the longer it's going to take to render. So some things we can do to combat that is if I go to some of my lights, like this one, and I go into the shadow section and I just turn off shadows. That will make my rendering go quicker because that light's not calculating shadows anymore.
Can you like bake scenes?
You can bake scenes. I'm not going to show that yet, but you can, yes. That means that all of our lighting information, the darkness that's underneath this desk here, it's actually just like locked in.
It's like a texture almost.
Right. And it turns it all into a texture. Think of it like a video game.
Yeah, we used it in video games.
Yeah, so in video games you would bake all this stuff in so it looks like it's all textured. The only problem with that is that if the chair were to move, the chair's shadow would not.
It's like stagnant stuff that's like always going to be there.
Right. So if you, like in a video game, you basically have your entire environment that's pretty stagnant, and then you have these random objects that you can destroy, right? And those ones would have different ones. Other things that add to your scene is reflections. So the more reflections you have inside your scene, the longer it's going to take. Because what happens is, you've seen the two mirrors, facing each other, or seen Inception, because they do it in Inception. You have that bouncing of reflections. So Maya's calculating that bouncing of reflections inside there. So if we go into trace depth. If we go into this thing called trace depth in our quality, we could actually lower that so it only does one bounce of reflection or two bounces. Right now it's at 4, so it goes like bounce, 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 bounce. So that would obviously speed things up, or I can just lessen the amount of reflective objects I have in my scene. Instead of making everything, because I did it on purpose, making everything a reflective plastic, maybe some things I just want to be diffuse, okay? Diffuse, there's no reflection, there's no specularity, it renders much quicker. If I grabbed everything and made it one diffuse, it would go super quick, or super quicker. All right, and that's gonna be it, okay? There's other stuff we could play with, but that's going to be it as far as this window for now. So let's close that window. Okay, and what we want to do is we want to set up our camera so that we can actually render out our camera moving into the scene. So we need to create a brand new camera to do that. So I'm going to, this is the way I do it, I hold down the space bar, I hold down my left mouse right on the word Maya, and I just go to new camera. Okay, you hold the space bar down, hold the left mouse button down, and you go to new camera, and you should be in a different camera name. So I was in perspective, now I'm in perspective 1. Now you could also, just to throw this into a tangent, because I seem to do that a lot, we could also create what are called stereo cameras. So like 3D cameras, we can actually create a stereo one too. Whoa. And if I go to this, it's thinking, and I go under my stereo and I say I want to see this as an anaglyph. Woo, there we go. So I'm actually seeing this as an anaglyph. So if I had my 3D glasses and I threw them on, this scene would actually look 3D.
That's trippy.
Yeah, which is pretty cool. And then we could adjust the properties and whatever else.
Can you render it that way?
You can. You wouldn't render it this, you can render it this way, but you typically don't. What you typically do is you render out 2 different images, okay? Because right now, if I zoomed out, just so we can see it, I should save. There we go. I actually have 3 cameras. This one is the one I was just looking through, and then I have this camera, which is your left eye, and this camera, which is your right eye. So when they do 3D for movies, they're actually videotaping 2 different camera angles, and that's how they get the 3D look. And then in the post software, like After Effects, they would put those together and be able to adjust it. Because right now, that's like way too much stuff going on.
I can't see my camera. How did you do that?
You don't need to see your camera. I'm just showing you how I did it.
Okay.
So I could adjust different properties inside here, like...
If you drag the camera to a different place, would that work? Or
It will, but we're not going to do it that way. Because we're going to be inside the camera the whole time.
Okay.
Stereo camera? They moved some of the stuff, but it was all right. Oh, that's why I'm in the wrong one. Panels, stereo camera rig, center. And then I'll select the camera. There we go. So now I should be able to control these things kind of going closer together or whatever. All right, so now I have them closer together, so I'll get a better look of 3D in there, okay? Not we need to do this for this class, but I'm just like to show these things because I think it's kind of neat because it's a different way to work, and there's a lot of different avenues you can go with the software. It's not like you're only going to do this for products or you're only going to do this for commercials. There's a lot of different things you can do.
How do you choose to render to like that camera view?
That'll be in our render settings. We didn't set that up yet
Oh.
because it said perspective by default, so we have to go back after and choose perspective 1 or whatever.
When you render, can you render 2 at once or no?
You can. I could actually have 20 cameras in here and show different things happening. Your advice for me about setting up cameras is think about it in the real world, okay? Quentin Tarantino, what's his name? Michael Bay, Steven Spielberg, they're famous directors. They know how to move a camera, and they can do these crazy camera shots that still feel good. You guys are not there yet, okay? So we start off very, very basic, okay? Basic means we wipe from one side to the other. We pull back, we zoom in, we turn the camera. That's all we're doing. Not all at the same time, just individually kind of things, okay? So what we're going to do is find a spot that we want to focus our view on. So I like to maybe go into like where my desk is. Okay, so I'm framing it. Whatever's inside this box on the outside, that's framing what my camera is seeing. So I want to set it up to show what my camera is seeing. I don't want to see any of that outside stuff, any of that black stuff, because that is basically 3D world, and I don't want it to look like a 3D world, even though it totally looks like a 3D world right now. Okay, so we push in as far as we can and get close to these objects. And then what we need to do is I need to set a keyframe on my camera. So I can click my camera in the outliner, and that's usually the easiest way for people is just go in the outliner, find your camera, which is perspective 1, and then I'm just going to hit S, and S sets a key. Okay, so I went to the outliner right here. I scrolled down to find my perspective view, and then I hit S to set a key. So I go to the outliner, I've made sure this is picked, it's highlighted. When I hit S, all of my stuff in the channel box becomes red. Red means that we have keyframe set, okay? Now, if I were to accidentally click on the chair and hit S, I've still set keyframes, but now I've done it on the chair. And I know that because the chair is selected here, my camera is not selected. So if I need to, I can highlight, right click, and delete the keyframes. But I need to make sure that on my perspective, I've set a keyframe on it. Now you'll also notice that the red is a bright red, okay? So now we're going to go to frame 120. So I'm just going to choose in here, frame 120. And now my keyframes or my channel box has turned to like a lighter red, okay? So now I'm going to zoom out and do the end of what I want my camera to look like at the end. And then hit S again.
I think I did that wrong.
You right click either in here if you want to get rid of it totally, or you can go to it here, right click, and delete. All right, now it's going super quick. It's very easy to accidentally add a camera because if we just do that, I've just added a camera. And I just added another one. I just added another. Oops, I didn't do that. Okay, so every time I do that, I'm adding a new camera. So if I go to my outliner, I have this many perspective views. Okay, so I have to make sure that whatever one I'm looking in down here is the same one I have selected over there in the channel box. Okay, so I don't even remember which one I was on. 1? Just delete all those. So I go to perspective 1, and I have my animation. Whoa. Okay, now it's going pretty slow or fast zooming out, so I'm going to change that. Right now it's not going in real time. Right now it's playing as fast as it can play, which is obviously too fast. So I'm going to hit stop. I'm going to right click on the timeline and say playback speed, play every frame, max real time. And then when I hit play, I should get a real feel for how that camera is moving. Okay, so now it's actually taking that long to get there. Now we never set up anything for how many frames per second there are. The default is 24. The default is 24. Oops. So that's what it's playing it back at, which for this is actually pretty good because we get 5 seconds of animation out of 24 frames per second. Okay? Now if we did 30, we'd actually only get like 4 seconds. So, you know, it's an extra second. All right, so that looks pretty cool. We could adjust stuff, but for what we're doing in here for today, we're good. So now I'm going to go back to my gear, my little render setting gear. And you'll see by default, make sure you hit stop by the way, and you'll see by default it automatically added in that new camera into my list. So it says renderable cameras in that common tab, and it says perspective 1 perspective. I just hit the trash can on the one I didn't animate. If you're not sure, check your view to see which one you've animated and delete the other one. So I know that perspective 1 is the one that I animated. Now this doesn't delete the camera, it just says I don't want to render that camera. That's all it says. Okay? We've had it before where people have gone through and rendered out the completely wrong camera, and then when they get into their scene, they have 120 frames of this. Okay? It doesn't move, it's just like the floor, because at some point they were looking at the floor and they chose perspective 2 instead of the correct camera. So as we render stuff, we always look at it to verify that we're doing the right thing. We're rendering the right camera. All right. So now that's all set. So that's good. 1 through 120. That's good. OpenEXR, zips. Yep. All right. Everything else should be good. All right. So now what we need to do is actually tell this thing to render. So what I want you to do is, regardless of where you're at with your file, we're going to all do a batch render together so you can see it. However, at any point, you can change any of the stuff in your scene, re-hit batch render, and then it'll do it all over again. Okay? So under the rendering section here, so I just choose rendering from this menu drop down, or you can use the hotbox. Oops. Come on. This here. We're just going to go to the render menu and go to the batch render option box. Okay? So we need to get to render, batch render option box. We only need to set one thing inside here, and that's auto render threads. Any idea what render threads are? They're processors, okay? Every computer has at least one processor in it. Your phone probably has at least 2 processors in it, even though they're not like crazy powerful. These computers have essentially 8 processors inside them. So what we want to do is we want to tell Maya to use all 8 processors to render our stuff out. And if it uses all 8 processors, this should go a lot quicker. Now Maya can be kind of dumb sometimes, so instead of putting 8 here, we put 12. We don't have 12 processors, but we tell it we have 12 so that it'll at least do 8. And then we just hit batch render and close. Okay? So now it's going to go through and it's going to render our stuff out. Oops. Down here on the bottom right, under the little running guy, there's this little semicolon piece of paper. Click the semicolon piece of paper and maximize what pops up.
What?
Nope, in your window, your other screen. Yep. This is showing us the progress for frame number 1. Not for our entire animation, just frame number 1. So if you look at the where it's saving it to, it's going, in my case, to the P drive, Sarcona, 2510, Word, this folder, inside my images folder, and then there's the name of it, okay? This is very important because what happens is after it's done rendering, you're going to go into your images folder and it might not be there because you didn't set your project, so it didn't know where to put it, and it just put it in whoever was here before you's folder, okay? Which could be very dangerous because if you spend 2 days rendering or the weekend rendering, that guy comes in and says, whose crap is this? And he just deletes it. Then your stuff is gone and now you have to redo all that stuff. So we always want to make sure that our stuff is going into the right spot. Now, mine finished frame number 1 because you can see I'm now on frame number 2, okay? Using a stopwatch or just using your best guess as far as like what time you started it and what time it is now, you can use it as a good guesstimate as to when your rendering will be done. If it takes 1 minute a frame and I have 120 frames, how long will that take to render?
2 hours.
2 hours, okay? So if you figure 2 hours to render our stuff out at 1 minute a frame, that's still a long time. And right now it's 6, so the next class is going to be coming in here at 8, so they're going to be affected by our stuff. So that's why if we are going to render and it's still rendering before we leave today, we'll put the sign on our computer. And most of the people in that other class have been exactly where you're sitting and have put their sign on their computer and have had people shut it down, so they don't want to feel that way. They don't want you to feel that way. So they will make sure that they don't turn your stuff off if at all possible. Okay?
What do we do if we come in and my computer's...
It's off. And it's off?
Yeah.
No, like someone else's is rendering. Like,
Oh, if someone else's is rendering, then we'll set up other stuff right now, I'll show you, that we will not be affected by the rendering. The only thing we won't be able to do is to change our preferences, okay? So our preference window we can't change. Once Maya's rendering, we can't change preferences, so we just leave it. Now here's a cool thing. I'm going to close my script editor. I'm going to save my scene, and I'm going to exit Maya. Okay? When we render, what happens is Maya opens up a new program, and a new program is called Maya Batch. And the Maya Batch program gets our file, and it does this batch rendering over here. So now Maya isn't even being used. Okay? So Maya is just done. I've closed it down. It's still rendering in the background. Now here's what I want you to do. I want you to right-click in your taskbar. This is called the taskbar down here. Right-click and go to the Start the Task Manager. All right, in the Processes tab, there's an Application tab and a Processes tab. In the Processes tab, you should see a process called Maya Batch. And it's going to be usually the one that has like the most CPU usage. Okay, so mine's at 96, 97. Yours might be at 30 or 40 or 50, depending on the stage it's at. Usually it bounces around. So I want you to right-click on Maya Batch. Go to Set Priority and tell it to be below normal. And then when the window pops up saying, are you sure? Then you would hit Change Priority. Okay, so before we did that, what Maya Batch was doing was taking over the entire station. Okay, if you tried to do anything like go to the internet, play a video, open Photoshop, it's a crawl, okay? It's a very slow, drunken crawl trying to get these things open. Now that we've done this, it tells Maya Batch, hey, I want you to render stuff, but if someone else comes on the computer and is doing it, then just put this back burner until they're done. And then when they're done, then use the whole processing power that you can, okay? Now the more processors you have in your computer, the faster your rendering will happen, typically, okay? So if we were to go and open, I'm just going to open up Internet Explorer, you'll see that it's not going to open up super quick and get to my stuff, but you can see how there was a drop in the Maya Batch. If I didn't do that below normal, there wouldn't have been a drop. Internet Explorer would have just opened very, very slowly, and everything I do would have been very slow. So all the people that now come on the computer and they're using it shouldn't be affected. So if I go to YouTube, you can see how that batch processor is just dips down, and I'm just using this as much as I can.
There's a way to do that for Mac?
No, there isn't. Macs are kind of silly in how they do stuff. I believe there is a utility you can download that will allow you to do that. But I think Macs handle their stuff different anyway, so there shouldn't be like a huge issue.
Oh, okay.
Okay. All right, so what we want to do is I want to go to the Start menu and I want to go into my folder and I want to look at that first frame. So I'm going to go find my folder. Where are you at? Tuesday, Thursday. It should be in your Images folder. And you should have at least one or two that are sitting there. You want to click on like the first one. Okay, or double click the first one. And I'm going to hit stop on here because it's going to start to play it and it's going to give me a black screen. Okay, so if I double click on that, it should start playing my animation if I have more than one frame.